Mitosis. I'm sure you've heard it in science class while you were half asleep and thought it was confusing, but it's not as hard as it seems. It's just taught in a way that makes it harder than it needs to be. In the next 10 minutes, I'll break it down so you actually get it. Mitosis explained simply. So first, let's start with the main goal of mitosis, because once you understand this, everything else becomes easier. The entire purpose of mitosis is for a cell to create an identical copy of itself. That's it. One cell becomes two identical cells.
Your body constantly needs this process because cells don't live forever. Skin cells die, cells get damaged, and your body also needs new cells to grow and repair tissue. For example, when you cut yourself, your body needs to carry out mitosis to make new skin cells to replace the old ones, or when you grow and get taller. The first step of mitosis is called interphase. Think of it as the enter phase, as this is basically the preparation stage for the cell. This is where the cell grows and DNA is being replicated. DNA replication is very important, as all DNA needs to be the same in order to carry out the same functions. DNA replication is a whole other process, so I will explain that in the next video. Now, one thing you have to remember for mitosis is the word PMAT. If you remember this word, you have basically memorized all the stages for mitosis.
The P is for prophase. In this stage, the nucleus, which is basically the control center of the cell, starts preparing for mitosis. The DNA condenses into visible chromosomes, and the spindle fibers, the weird stick-looking things at the edges of the cell, begin forming on opposite sides of the cell. Lastly, the nuclear membrane begins to break down. The spindle fibers are really important because they help move chromosomes around the cell later. You can think of them almost like tiny ropes. The reason chromosomes condense is because loose DNA would be extremely difficult to organize and separate neatly. Imagine trying to untangle long spaghetti strands compared to moving organized sticks around. The cell is making the DNA easier to manage. Now the M. The M stands for metaphase. Think of it as a meeting phase because during metaphase, the chromosomes line up across the equator of the cell, which means the middle, but during an exam you should use the equator of the cell as it sounds smarter and might get your grades up. So if you ever hear metaphase, know that the chromosomes are meeting in the middle. This is important as the spindle fibers attach to the chromosomes from opposite sides and hold them in place in the center. This stage is very important because the cell is basically making sure everything is lined up correctly before the chromosomes get pulled apart. Anaphase. During this stage, this is where the spindle fibers pull each sister chromatids apart to the opposite side of the cell. Something important to remember is that the X-shaped chromosome is actually made of two identical sister chromatids that join together at the center. So when they separate, each half still contains the same genetic information. Once pulled apart, each sister chromatid is now considered its own chromosome, meaning both sides of the cell still end up with identical DNA. Now the fourth stage is telophase. During this stage, the chromosomes reach opposite ends of the cell and new nuclear membranes begin forming around them. It almost starts to look like two separate bubbles forming inside the cell, as two new nuclei begin to appear. The chromosomes also start uncoiling back into loose chromatin again. At this point, the hardest part of mitosis is basically over because the DNA has already been evenly separated. The last stage of mitosis is cytokinesis. Cytokinesis is where the cell splits in the middle, forming two new cells. This happens because the cytoplasm, which is the jelly-like substance inside the cell that holds everything in place, divides, and the cell physically splits into two separate daughter cells. Daughter cells are just the two new cells that are formed from the original cell. You can easily remember this because the original cell is kind of like the mother, and when it splits into two new cells, it's like it gave birth to the daughter. By the end of this stage, there are two new cells, and they are both genetically identical, meaning they contain the same DNA as the original cell. Now that we understand the process of mitosis, we need to understand why mitosis matters. Mitosis is extremely important because multicellular organisms constantly need new cells. And when I say multicellular organisms, I mean anything made up of more than one cell, which is quite literally almost all living things, apart from things like bacteria and viruses which are made of a single cell. Your body uses mitosis all the time for growth, repair, and replacement of cells, like healing cuts or replacing skin cells. Mitosis is also important to understand because it helps us understand how living things work at a basic level. And that knowledge is what scientists use to develop new treatments and discover ways to fight diseases, including things like cancer, where cell division happens incorrectly. Understanding processes like mitosis is how new medical ideas are discovered in the first place. That's why staying curious about biology matters, because every big scientific discovery starts with understanding something small, like how a single cell divides. Now, if you write something like that in your exam, you're surely going to get some crazy grades. So basically, without mitosis, wounds wouldn't heal, growth wouldn't happen, damaged tissue couldn't repair itself, which would be a disaster. If you're going to take one thing away from this video, let it be the word PMAT. If you know this, you will 100% remember the rest. So here's a quick recap. Interphase is where the cell grows and replicates. Prophase, chromosomes condense and spindle fibers form. Metaphase, chromosomes line up in the center. Anaphase, sister chromatids separate. Telophase, new nuclei form. Cytokinesis, the cell splits completely. And once you stop treating mitosis like random words to memorize, the process actually becomes much simpler. Because really, the cell only has one goal: copy its DNA accurately and divide it evenly into two new cells. Now, I hope I explained that well enough for you to understand. Good luck on your exams, and any questions or videos, ideas, just comment down below and make sure to subscribe.